So, what does it mean for us to be generous? You ever thought about that really? I mean, I think sometimes we think about generosity in our culture, we think Christmas time, right? What kind of gifts can we give when somebody has a birthday? How can we be generous? Sometimes you may think generosity when your waiter or waitress has been really good. You might think, well, let's be generous in that moment. What about when they've really stunk, right? And they have not filled up your glass, and you've had to beg for every bit of attention, and it's just been a horrible service experience. In that moment where you get to choose how much you're going to tip them, that's when generosity really comes into play. Because the heart of the believer, the heart of somebody who really understands the gospel and has allowed the gospel to penetrate their hearts in such a deep way, would understand that that's the moment where a generous act demonstrates the grace of God that God demonstrated towards us. So what does it mean to be generous? We just watched this great video. I love the passion of this pastor who's walking the streets, right? Trying to reach as many people as possible. And did you see the joy on his face? Because the villagers had built him a hut, like a lean-to basically. And there's straw on the ground. There's 100 people that come to worship God on Sunday mornings under this shelter that most of your subdivisions wouldn't allow you to build in your backyard because it wouldn't meet the standards of your covenants. And yet they're thrilled at the generosity of God, at God's blessing, the generosity of the villagers to recognize the goodness of the gospel and how the gospel is positively impacting their community in such a way that they want to respond. Do you see the appreciation that happens when generosity is played out? They're pointing to the gifts of these shoe boxes which initiated that, which was the impact that started all that. In other words, that pastor never has that shelter that 100 people can worship under if it weren't for some people giving shoe boxes that he could then take into that village and then have the material that he could follow up with them and teach those children and draw that community towards the gospel. There had to be an open door. There had to be generosity somewhere on the heart of believers somewhere to open that door for that pastor. And when I see stuff like this, man, it breaks my heart for our love of our stuff and our almost sense of entitlement for the things that we have and the way our Western culture has tainted us to the point where we have this expectation that we can just do what we want, when we want, how we want it, and that we can have everything instantaneously, we can have it quickly, and that everything just flows towards us instead of flowing away from us. We're getting ready to kick off this week our Operation Christmas Child Shoebox Collection, which has been a big thing for us every year. It's one of the greatest ways I think that we as a church can become a missional body together. There's a few things that we do corporately each year, and this is one of those things that we do corporately. And when I say corporately, I mean as a whole church, we do this together. Because I think it's important for us to do things like this together so that you'll be impacted and encouraged to go off and do these things like this on your own. Right? At the Connect group level, that they'll be actively, missionally involved within their community, impacting people for the good of the gospel, as well as you individually will grow from being not just a part of a church that does missional stuff, but that you will begin to live a missional life. And that's a dramatic transition that needs to take place in our hearts for us to really accomplish, I think, what the gospel has called us to. It's a simple thing to take one of these shoe boxes and to fill it up with stuff for a boy or for a girl, to pick your age group, to put the information in there and to put $7 in there that will help cover the shipping cost. It's so simple to do that, right? But just think about the lasting impact that it could have. That child who receives that box gets exposed to the gospel maybe for the first time, and maybe in the only way that the gospel could ever reach that child. That's what generosity is about. Generosity says I can fill up one, or generosity says, what can I sacrifice so that I might be a true blessing, and how many of these I can actually fill out. We've got 400 of them that are empty, that are stacked up by the doors. When you leave today, I want you to take 1 or 4 or 40, whatever you feel like you want to fill up. Because over the next few weeks, we're talking about what does it mean to be generous. And I think what we're going to talk about it, the way we're going to talk about it is not how you expect it. We're going to be looking at Mark chapter 10, a section of Mark chapter 10. And within this section is some interesting things that take place. And Jesus eventually in this passage, there's going to be, he's going to approach the idea of generosity towards the end of the series, really. But we're really talking about it throughout. But there's some groundwork that we have to lay in order to get to that true point of generosity. So I want you to kind of pay attention with me and kind of like try to put all the pieces together. I encourage you to be here every single week so that we can kind of grow in this and understand this together. It's going to be 5 weeks long. We're going to be studying this passage from Mark chapter 10. It kind of set the tone for you. Where has Jesus been to this point in his ministry? When we come to find him in Mark chapter 10, he's already done a lot of things. He's already called all the apostles. He's already established who they are. He's already done multiple healings. He's been involved in interactions and altercations in some ways, verbally, at least with the Pharisees. They've challenged him on some of his points. They've brought people to him and challenged him, and he's healed them, and then he's challenged them verbally and theologically and doctrinally and understanding kind of what it means to really serve God. There's been all these beautiful interactions, and throughout the ministry of Jesus to this point, he's been touching and healing, touching and healing, touching and healing, touching and healing. A lot of scholars will call Mark like taxi cab Greek. Because in the original Greek that we find in the manuscripts we have in Mark was written in a very simple language. It's like very simple. Like some people write in the English language, they write very simple English. They don't use a lot of vocabulary. They use very simple sentence structure and all that kind of stuff. Some people write very eloquently, and they speak very eloquently, and they use complicated words and complicated extended sentence structure. That would be the Gospel of John. The Gospel of Mark is just an every man's gospel. It's like he just breaks it down as simple and basic as he possibly can. He's telling the same story. He just like, he gets rid of some of the fluff, and he just kind of dives right into like the heart of what Jesus did and what Jesus said. And so when we read Mark, we understand that we're looking at the essence of the gospel. Like the foundation of what we need to understand about who Jesus is. So when we think about the idea of generosity, there's a lot of different words that describe what does it mean to be generous, to be liberal, to be lavish, to be magnanimous, munificent. That's a great word. Write that word down, munificent. Use that in a sentence today and you get extra 10 points. Giving, open-handed, free-handed, bountiful, unselfish, ungrudging, free, indulgent, kind, benevolent, altruistic, charitable, noble, big-hearted, self-sacrificing. I think you could take all of those words and you could look at the life in Jesus and the death and the resurrection of Jesus, and you could apply every single one of those words to him and everything that he did. And we call ourselves followers of him. If we're really following him, then all those words should be evident in describing us. And I think for many of us, we've got to work in that area. What does it mean to be generous? We're going to look at Mark chapter 10, verses 13 through 16 today. We'll unpack this idea as we go green right here at Quest Fellowship Church this morning. You guys are excited about that green, aren't you? They were giving me a lot of hard time in the sound booth this morning about the green. They didn't like the green. I like the green. So guess what we get to do? We get to live with the green. That's right. Mark chapter 10, 13 through 16. And they were bringing children to him that he might touch them. And the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw it, he was indignant and said to them, "Let the children come to me. Do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of God. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it." And he took them in his arms, and he blessed them, laying his hands on them. The first thing I think we need to talk about as we lay the foundation for what it means to be generous people is who has access to Jesus. Who has access to Jesus? You may think this is a stupid question. Some of you snickered because you did think it was a stupid question. right? I mean, like, who has access to Jesus? Who should have access to Jesus? Like, we say very clearly in our doctrine and our understanding of the gospel that Jesus died for everybody, that everybody should have access to it, and that his truth of what he offers on the cross is open for everybody. It's a truth. It's one of those absolute truths for all of humanity for all time. But do we really live in such a way that demonstrates our stated belief that everybody has access to Jesus? What were the apostles doing in this moment, right? Jesus is in a house, and they're in the region of Judah, and the people are coming to him because he's healed, and he's healed, and he's healed, and he's touched, and he's healed, and he's touched, and he's healed. And so parents, right, what do we want for our children? We want them to be blessed. We want them to feel the love of God. We want them to have the best. We want them to have it better than us. And we do things. We go out of our way. We'll make sacrifices ourselves in order to achieve the best for our children. And so naturally the parents of the community, man, they're like, Jesus is in the house, man. Grab your kid. Let's go take the kid to Jesus. Let Jesus touch the child and bless the child. It's a natural thing for a parent to want to do this. And the apostles are like, no. No. Jesus don't have time for this. He's too important for this. Right? Who has access to Jesus? How do we determine who has access to the only Son of God? Like, I know that the apostles were like, they weren't like trying to be mean. I know that in their heart they were just trying to protect Jesus, trying to make sure that he didn't get worn out, and that make sure that he had the things that he needed and he was cared for, because there's probably other people that wanted to get to Jesus too. At this point, like, he's done a lot of stuff that people would be drawn to. Who has access to Jesus? What do we have to do as individuals to make the gospel accessible to the people that we encounter? You ever thought about that? Because this is where it gets to the question of, are we living in such a way that we really live in a life that means that the door is open to Jesus? Or is there something that we're doing in our life, in the way that we're operating, the way that we treat people, the way that we talk to people, that is closing part of the door for some people to access Jesus simply because we refuse to get over ourselves and live for Jesus and really live for him? Is there something in the way that we're operating in our life that's shutting the door, just like the apostles were trying to keep the kids away? In order for us to open the door to give everybody access, I think we should be peace seekers. Some of you guys love to fight. Some of you love a good argument. You feed off of it. You get energized by it. You love to be right about stuff. I know some of you are like that because I'm like that. And I hope I'm not the only one, right? Because I'm feeling pretty bad. Sometimes we have to just say, okay, I'm just going to be wrong. It's okay. I don't have to be right in this moment. Even though in your mind you know you're right, right? Sometimes you don't have to prove it in order to maintain peace. I think we should be peace seekers. And sometimes especially, I know believers who are really into apologetics, which means that they kind of have an understanding of how to defend our faith. And so they'll take that knowledge base of what they believe about the doctrine and the understanding of how to prove Christianity to people, and they'll go to people who are non-believers, and they'll beat them over the head with this knowledge that they have to try to win them to the love of Jesus. And I'm like, that doesn't work, man. Like, to try to win a theological argument with a non-believer, you're ostracizing them from the hope of the gospel in their lives. We should be peace seekers. Think about the relationships in your life. Are you at peace? Are you at peace at home? Are you at peace with your neighbors? Are you at peace with your coworkers, with your bosses, with your subordinates at work, your coworkers? Are you at peace with those people? Or do you consistently find yourself having to deal with conflict? If you're consistently finding yourself having to deal with conflict, that's not everybody else's problem. Might be something you want to examine. How do I keep finding myself here? I think to have access to the gospel for the people around us, man, we should be filled with joy. Like the apostles had kind of like taken on this role of protectorship, and they're kind of, okay, we're in charge here now, man. Yeah, we're just fishermen, but we're in charge right here in this moment where you're trying to get in the door where Jesus is. And they lost the joy of coming to Jesus. They lost the excitement and the joy that these people had of bringing their kids to see Jesus and allow them to touch them. Have we lost the joy of seeing people come to Jesus? Have we lost that? Did you see the kids on the video when they got the boxes, man? Joy. Unadulterated joy. Just throwing caution to the wind, no limits, joy. Does the love of Jesus fill you to the point to where that's what's in your heart? Or do you walk around like looking angry and like looking like you're mad all the time? This is Ken Davis, he said he met a guy one time and the guy said, man, I've been a Christian for like 40 years. And he's like, well, tell your face. Because you don't look like you're filled with joy at all. Like the joy of the gospel. We should be happy people. Right? We should overflow with the joy of the love of Jesus, and that should open the door to people to come and to see Jesus in us. We should operate in kindness, not harshness. We should be kind. We should be givers of grace because we've been receivers of grace. Like I just think if I see people that are claiming to be believers and they're not operating with grace with anybody in their life, I'm like, do you really understand the gospel? Do you really understand how much of a sinner you are before a holy God and how much grace he gave you when Jesus died on the cross? Do you really understand the gospel? Because if you really understand it, like you really understand the miracle of your salvation in your sinfulness, then there's no way you can't operate with grace towards other people. How dare us put ourselves above others when we're sinners just like they are? I believe, man, we should live with generosity. Not the kind of generosity that simply gives an extra 0.5% to the waiter or the waitress when they did a good job. I mean, the kind of generosity when they've been horrible that we give them a 30% tip. The kind of generosity that says, all right, we can afford to fill up 2 boxes, but we're going to fill up 8. The kind of generosity that says, okay, well, we've done all the things we want to do. We've paid our cell bill. We've paid our satellite and our cable bill. We've been out to eat all the times we want to. We bought all the new clothes. We've been on vacation. And there's $5 left over. Let's give it to church when we come to church this morning. That's not being generous. Generosity says, when you receive whatever it is you get, as your payment for the work that you do, how can I use this to bless God and to honor God? How much of this can I give for his glory? How much of this can I use to be a sign and a shining light of the gospel to others? So in other words, when you give to the ministries of Quest Fellowship Church, you're giving to the cause of the gospel. I want you to believe that that's our heart. Our mission as a church is to make disciples and teach disciples. That's what defines us as a church. The call of the gospel defines everything that we do. We're leading and teaching and moving so we can impact our community for the gospel. We want to change our local community. We want to change the world with the gospel. So when you give to the ministries of the church, you're supporting that effort and that passion. There's so many things that we desire to do as a church, as a staff, where we have these big, huge dreams about how we can impact our culture and how we as a church that has been through the story of revitalization could be an encouragement and an impact church to other churches that are struggling, how we could help them financially and how we could pour resources of people into them. It takes money to be able to do those kinds of things, and that's empowering the gospel. Think about all the churches that you know that are struggling, that don't know how to move forward in order that the gospel would be active in their community. We could impact them, and therefore we're impacting the gospel in the lives of the people in that community. It takes resources to do that. God has called us to give generously. There's no doubt in my mind. People talk about giving a tithe. Yeah, that's a great place to start. I think New Testament giving under what Jesus said about giving was that we give according to our heart, and if your heart is where it needs to be, then you're going to be a generous giver. You're not going to be based on just a small percentage of who you are and what the finances that God has entrusted you with. You're going to go more than that. You're going to do more than that. It's going to be more about how can I give in such a way that really looks generous? That opens the door. That gives people access to get a touch from Jesus. And finally, and here's the most important thing, for us as individuals to open the door to Jesus, man, you got to be willing to tell your Jesus story. Do you understand that? You got to be willing to say, this is who I was before Jesus. This is how I met him. This is who I am now. This is the power of what that's done in my heart and in my life and in my marriage and in my work and in my career. This is how it's totally changed me. You ought to try it for yourself. Yeah, it's great if you invite people to come to Quest Fellowship Church. It's great. We'll talk about the gospel. I'll tell them what it means to be a follower of Jesus. I love to have those conversations. But the most impactful thing is when people that you matter to, when you tell them your story, that is the most open door to the gospel that they could ever receive, is you being willing to tell your story. So, as a church, collectively, corporately, what can we do to open the door to Jesus, to give people access to Jesus? Number one, we got to love each other. No doubt about it, we got to be a loving group towards each other. You remember in Acts 2, the very beginning of the early church, the initial church there, it says that they were giving, they were like selling their possessions and making sure everybody, all their needs were being met. And so they were loving each other in such a way, it says that they had favor in the community, and God was adding to their number day by day those who were being saved. Because they were loving each other. It was something that other people wanted to be a part of. We got to be intentional about that. We got to be a friendly church. When people come in, like, are you speaking to people? Or are you just like going through the people you know? I'm not talking to anybody today. I'm going to go in, I'm going to sit down. Or are you like being friendly and finding out, are there people that have, there may be people like in this room right now, and you guys have been coming to church together for years and you've never talked. That shouldn't happen. Like, I'm an introvert, I get it. Like, I promise you, we'll never do one of those things where, all right, I want you to turn to your neighbor and say hello today. Because as an introvert, I know how horrible that is. But I encourage you, man, when you leave here today, find somebody that you don't know who they are and just go say, hey, my name's so-and-so. How long you been coming to Quest? It's your first date? Great. You've been coming for 3 years? Me too. Be friendly to each other. Be engaging. Be intentional about engaging people that you don't know. Man, make being here a priority. Make being a part of what we're doing on Sunday mornings a priority. Don't just say, oh, man, it's raining this morning. I'll watch it on YouTube later. You missed the whole point of being here in the room with everybody. It's so much more fun. Live missionally. We got to be a missional church, people. Like, the community needs to know that we're not just talking about our faith, that we're actually living our faith. So we've got to be active in that. If you're heading up a Connect group, man, you have a responsibility to push your Connect group to be a missional body in our community. Don't just let that slide. That is an open door to the gospel. We've got to give generously, like we just talked about. We have to invite the unchurched, right? Get them to come, right, with you. Build relationships with them with the intention that you're going to invite them and get them involved and tell them your story. This is how we open the door to Jesus, because we don't want to be in such a situation where we're shaping ourselves in such a way that we are limiting access to Jesus without intentionally doing it. Right? Be aware that when we see people, we need to see people as God sees them. And God sees brokenhearted people in need of his love and in need of his grace. He doesn't care about the color of their skin. He doesn't care about their socioeconomic status. He doesn't care about their finances. He doesn't care about their career. What he cares about is their heart. And that's all that should matter to us. And then we should fling the door wide open to them so that everybody has access to the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. And then Jesus said, when he noticed this, he became indignant. It means he was ticked off. Jesus is like, man, what are you doing? No, 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 no. Let them come to me. It wasn't just that Jesus loved children, because I'm sure Jesus loved children. It was that he was getting ready to use this moment to teach. Jesus was a master at this. Like finding ways along the journey to be able to teach something. And then Jesus says, like, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it. What do you think about that statement? Whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it. What does that mean? You adults in the room, would you take a sunflower and just bury your face in it like this little girl is? There's a few in the room who would. Yeah, I know. I love you people. You keep the rest of us going when we're down. What's the difference between a child and an adult? Like when we come to Jesus and we come to him as an adult, like how does that differ from when we come to him and we approach him as a child? Well, let's look at the difference. Like the inner heart of a child, this is not something scientific, this is just my observations. A child operates with innocence. Just beautiful innocence. A child is always trying to learn. They're seeking. They're exploring everything. They operate in wonder. When's the last time you were just in awe of something? A child has easy joy. They're open-hearted. They're accepting. They're truth tellers. Not that they always tell the truth. But they operate with truth. Like they'll tell you the truth about you, won't they? One of the funniest things I've seen recently is Jimmy Kimmel does this lie detective thing where he interviews kids as he's a police officer. And he has the truth fairy, which is this Hispanic guy who's in his tight fairy costume. And he hooks the kids up to this lie detector and he asks them questions. Like, I want you to pay attention. I got a video of this little kid who's doing it, and he's 4 years old. And I just want you to pay it because this is hilarious. But I think it demonstrates like the significant difference because we as adults can laugh at this. But like for the kid, it's very real. I'm glad you didn't hook me up to that. Like we just get so much joy from watching the kid, don't we? I guess he just operating in his truth, right? In his mind, he does have a hippo at home. It's imaginary, but to him, imaginary is real because kids can operate in that world. And to them, it's all real. And I think what Jesus was saying in this moment, that you need to come to me like with that sense of awe and wonder and like just untainted faith. Can you come to Jesus in that way? What about the heart of adults? We're tainted by more years in this broken world, man. We've had more years to be hurt and to be hurt and to be hurt, to get over it, to move on, to get hurt. Like we're tainted. It's harder for us in some ways to come to Jesus because we're tainted. We're skeptical. We're suspicious. We're jaded. Man, we've developed obsessions that we love more than we love Jesus because we've just had more time. And we operate in shades of truth. We're so good at shaping the truth to fit our needs and to fit our desires. And Jesus, I think, is saying, and we're going to get to an interaction at the end of this message series where all this comes into play and it becomes so evident. But I want you to understand, Jesus is saying we need to come to him like a child with that sense of awe and wonder at his majesty and his love and his grace. That sense of just unfettered faith. What holds your heart? What holds your thoughts? What are your obsessions? Where does the money go? Do you gape at the truth of your salvation with wonder and awe? Jesus said, this is how you need to come to me. Like a child. All right, so quickly we're going to go through this whole idea of being touched by Jesus. This is an important part of this passage. At the end, when Jesus was indignant and let the children come to him, he took them in his arms, the scripture says, and he blessed them. He laid his hands on them, and he blessed them. What does it mean to be touched by Jesus? There's one passage I want to read, because I think from Matthew chapter 9, verses 18 through 26. Pay attention as people are touched by Jesus. While he was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler came and knelt before him, saying, my daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her, and she will live. And Jesus rose and followed him with his disciples. And behold, a woman who had suffered from a discharge of blood for 12 years came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment. For she said to herself, if I only touch his garment, I will be made well. Jesus turned and seeing her said, take heart, daughter, your faith has made you well. And instantly the woman was made well. And when Jesus came to the ruler's house and saw that the flute players and the crowd that were making a commotion, he said, go away, for the girl is not dead, she's sleeping. But they laughed at him. When the crowd had been put outside, he went in and he took her by the hand, and the girl arose. And the report of this went out throughout the district. Do you see the power of a touch from Jesus? If you go and you read throughout the book of Mark and the book of Matthew and the book of John, the Gospels, where Jesus is interacting with people and he's laying his hands on them and he's touching them and he's healing them and he's bringing them to love and he's bringing them to the grace and the love of God. This is what we have to offer people, is a touch from Jesus. We need to be a church, and we need to be a people that flings the door wide open so that everybody can come. So, to follow through today, here's what I want you to walk away with. I want you to be able to look at others through the eyes of Jesus. I want you to be able to look at others through the eyes of Jesus, not through the jaded world of our culture and what our culture says how you should look at people, but look at them through the eyes of Jesus. And then I want you to examine your heart for obstacles to unfettered faith, the faith of a child. And begin to remove those obstacles and tear them down and break them down moment by moment, prayer by prayer, so that you can come to Jesus with the faith of a child. Would you stand? I'm going to pray for us. We're going to sing. We're going to have a great time of responding to this call to generosity today, this call to come to Jesus with the heart of a child so that we can be generous givers and generous